Okay, hello. I'm really excited to be here today, and I said to Kyla, you're going to explain to them, right, why I'm talking about childhood trauma in a social enterprise conference, so that you can understand the connection. But there's so much about what we'll talk about that really inform the change process. I work in the space of systemic change in child welfare in the country, and understanding this is really fundamental to the work that I do in change in organizations. So I'm really excited to be here with you. So the first thing I want to talk about is that as humans, we are made to connect with one another. It's essential to our well-being, to our thriving, but particularly to our surviving. We come into the world, each and every one of us, physically tethered to another human being. And if you're not positive about that, I can give you a second to check. But you carry a daily reminder that, in fact, you would not be here had it not been for another human being to bring you into this world. And as soon as that connection is untethered, our lifelong search for that connection and belonging, for safety, begins. And so as I think I may have skipped one, yes. So as we come into the world as babies, we are vulnerable from the second we're born, and we know it, right? We know it because as soon as we're born, the mind registers, hey, I'm not going to make it on my own, and if another human doesn't come for me, my life is at risk. And that registers immediately upon the untethering. And babies will call out into the ether, hello, I'm here. Somebody come take care of me. Because if you don't come, I'm done for. If another human does not come to take care of a human infant, it dies. I mean, just think about that for 1 second. From the second we arrive, we are reliant on one another for our survival and our thriving. And so babies will begin to ask through their behavior, they will experiment in the environment to answer these questions. Am I safe? Am I lovable? And can I trust others to meet my needs? Am I safe? Am I lovable? Can I trust others to meet my needs? And the answers to these questions will impact and shape every relationship that they will have the whole rest of their lives. So the answer to those questions for you when you were young, am I safe? Am I lovable? Can I trust others to meet my needs? Has shaped what kind of a partner you are, what kind of a parent you are, what kind of a neighbor or supervisor you are, and how you react when people cut you off in traffic. All of that is shaped early on, okay, by those questions. So they're very critically important, these early experiences. And we must connect with other humans in order to feel safe. And that sense of belonging is with us forever. I want to tell you a little story to illustrate that. I was on vacation with my young children, and we were at Lake Michigan, which for us Midwesterners, I'm from Minneapolis, Lake Michigan is our ocean, okay? And so it's super deep. You can't see the other side. The waves sometimes get so big you can't swim in it. It's a scary thing for little kids, and if you're the mama. So we got there on vacation. They ran out of the van. They were waist deep in the water before I could get to them. They were young and not yet swimmers. And I called to them, babies, get over here. You're not going to believe it. Because that's what moms of toddlers do. You create a scene, they get all excited, and suddenly they're listening again. And I said, do you see this mama duck? Yes, Mama, we do. And do you see how her babies are lined up right behind her, and she goes this way and that way, and they follow? Yes, Mama, we do. Well, why do you think that is? Why do those babies follow that mama like that? What could happen to them if they weren't close to mama? They could get eaten up by a big eagle. They might drown in the water or not know what to eat. And I said, that's right. The safest place is next to mama. Don't forget it. And I know they're going to need therapy for that later, but it's super important and true, right? Is that safest place is close to mama. So even still today, I will use quack, quack as my symbol. Scary person, scary dog, scary situation. I say quack, quack, they line up. We practice it, I'm not kidding. So So this is called imprinting, right? In the animal kingdom, the second the duck hatches, they're looking around. Who's in charge of me? Because I'm not going to make it on my own. Somebody's going to eat me. Where are you at? Where are you at? And they find mama, and they're like, that's it. It's called imprinting. And if there's no mama, have you seen these funny YouTube videos? What do they do next, right? They don't care. It's like the pig, the farmer, whoever you are, if you're in the vicinity, if mama's not there, you're in charge of them officially right now. And they follow you around, right? So in the animal kingdom, we call that imprinting. And in the human race, we call this attachment. So our babies come from the second they're born, ready to connect. We are all hardwired and born this way. Our eyes are abnormally large for the size of our head. Babies are some of the softest things you've ever felt in your life. You just want to hold and touch them. They smell sweetly. I don't know what it is. I can't really explain it, but there's a chemical, something that's like that new baby smell, right? So you just want to hold them and love them and cuddle them and touch them and coo to them. They come with mirror neurons that if you smile at them, they smile at you. You stick your tongue out, they stick their tongue out. You coo-coo, they coo-coo back. It's just like the most amazing thing that happens. Why? So that we fall in love. So that at 2 and 3 and 4 in the morning, we will get up and feed the baby. Because without that connection, they know they're done for. If they're not lovable, their survival is at risk, right? And the same is true of you. The same is true our whole lives long, which is why being lovable is so important. So this is my son, Noah, right? He asked me on vacation last summer, Mama, how many people are there in the world? And I said, we should ask the Google that someday, but it's a lot. Right? And then he said, well, how many have you seen? Well, fewer. How many have you met? Fewer still. How many do you really know? Even fewer still. And then he said, but you belong to me. And this is Noah's way of saying to me, Mama, get on a plane, do your thing, meet all those people you talk about, whatever, you're coming home to me, right? You still got me, right? Noah was born 10 weeks early, and so he's constantly reaffirming this connection. He's saying to me, you got me, right? I belong to you, right? He'll ask me crazy things like, Mama, if we were by train tracks, I'm like, Noah, let's just stay away from the train tracks, right? Yes, I would. We're not going to go there, okay? But it's that need for affirmation and connection. It's why we say I love you to each other, to hear it back, to affirm that connection, because in that connection with other humans, we feel safe, and I'll explain about why. And so if your phone were to ring right now, and you got the worst news of your life, what's the very next thing you do? Say it was the best news of your life, the best thing that could ever happen to you. What's the very next thing you do? You call somebody you love. Gosh dang it, so awesome, right? This is what we do next, is we call the people we love next. And why is that? Because it is not the what's that matter, it's our who's that matter. It is our who's, not our what's, that matter most. It is our connections with other people. And in fact, you can live without almost anything else besides your connections to others and your belonging. Because when you lose that, you are very vulnerable. We are a tribal people. We're human. We have to do things like go to the bathroom, sleep, eat, things that we as animals make us more vulnerable. And we can't always be on. We get sick, we get tired, we get sad, we get lonely. We have ups and we have downs. And it is in our connection with other people that we manage those ups and downs and vulnerabilities of life. So our brain registers from the second we're born, we need to be connected to others or we're vulnerable. And when we don't feel safe and when we don't feel connected, when we don't feel like we belong, it changes our brain. And I'm not going to get into the neuroscience today, but trust me on this. It chemically and physically changes your brain when you don't know for sure that you belong. And how it changes is it goes into survival brain. So you go into this space where you start to say, I'm in it on my own. Nobody's got my back, right? Nobody's got me. And I don't mean I don't know some people. I mean when I end up in the hospital for a week or two, I'm going to be there alone night after night, and nobody is going to set it all aside to make sure I'm okay. That's what I mean. Those people, the got your back no matter what people, right? I was texting with my nephew this morning. He just went off to college, and I sent him another box he got, and he opened up. He's like, thanks a lot. And I said, look, it's a physical reminder. It's love in a box. I'm on your side. I'm in your fan club. I've got your back no matter what. We're super proud of you. Go do this thing, right? I've got you. And sometimes it comes in hot tamale popcorn. Sometimes. But it's love in a box, right? So when you're in survival brain, I'm in it on my own. I've got nobody to protect me. I have to do it all myself, trust only myself, and then everyone and everything becomes a threat to me. Do you understand that? If I'm in it on my own, I have to constantly be vigilant. I have to constantly be on guard, constantly be activated, because who knows what could happen, and nobody's going to stay watch for me when I'm not at my best, or when I'm asleep, or when I'm, in other vulnerable situations. So when you're in survival brain, you're not in your thinking brain. Your thinking brain does higher order function. Your survival brain is your lizard brain. And so you become very mammalian, right? You become very animal-like. And what it feels like to live in your survival brain most of the time, which people who did not feel safe, lovable, and as though they could trust others to meet their needs, what it feels like is like you're on the battlefield. Like the enemy is approaching. You can hear the enemy fire in the distance. You're out of ammunition. It's a wide open field. You got a tiny little rock. There's nowhere to hide, and you just know it's a matter of time before they come for you. And nobody's going to help protect you. And you live like that, activated a lot of the time, way up here, ready to fight for your survival. And so for the sake of illustration, I'm making these numbers up, but we'll illustrate. For the sake of illustration of what it feels like in survival brain, what it feels like to feel on your own is this. If we say that 0 is the ultimate calm, right? Really just totally Zen state, completely calm, and 60 is just losing it, going off, right? What happens when you have trauma, when you're not deeply connected in these ways when you're young, when you didn't feel safe, is you lose your runway. So you live at 30, 40, 55, you live right here instead of here. So when you get mad, it's not like, oh, I got mad, and then I calm myself down. It's like, I got mad, and I shot everybody in the building, right? That's what it looks like. And so that's an extreme example, but what it means is you lose your ability to regulate and come back. You go into full-out animal survival brain. You're not thinking at all, and your brain takes away the capacity to think on purpose to save your life. Because if a lion was coming at you, if you were still thinking, you'd be thinking, oh, here's a lion coming at me, and boom, you're dead, right? It zeroes in. You can't hear as well. You can't access past memory. Everything zeroes in like this in order for you to see the threat and protect yourself. No thinking happens. No past experience happens. So when people say, what were you thinking in those moments? The answer is nothing. I was surviving, right? So this is what happens, and here's how it looks in real life. So I was at the pool with my daughter, my 9-year-old Josie, and she introduced me to another mom from her Taekwondo class. We were chit-chatting, and a woman walked by in the cutest swimsuit I've ever seen, had daisies on it, and I registered it for 1/10 of 1 second, like, what a cute swimsuit. So blah, 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 blah. Well, apparently, this woman lives at 59, and that 1/10 of 1 second was enough to register to her brain, this woman's gonna kill me, right? So I kind of looked over briefly, came back, and what was her response? Not like, oh, did you like my suit? Did you want to know where I got it? No. Her response was, what are you looking at? You want to say something to me? And I did automatically what humans do who are threatened, which is this. You make yourself slow and low. I expose all of my vital organs, so you could take me out if you wanted to. I mean you no harm, right? I mean you no harm. No, I'm sorry, I was just cute suit. anyway, right? And my daughter, in witnessing this, whispers to me, "Mama, that woman did not have her needs met when she was little." I said, "That's right. That's what it looks like. That's how it shows up." That's why some people are so reactive, and you may be this person on occasion. You may be married to or formerly married to this person. You may come across these people in driving in traffic, right? This is a very, very, very common experience. This is why feeling unlovable gets stored as trauma in the brain. Because if I'm not lovable, it means that I don't belong to your tribe. You're not going to protect me. You're not going to get up and take care of me when I'm young, but when I'm older, I still need to belong to your tribe. And if I'm not lovable, it means you're not going to give me the resources I need to survive. And so it registers that way. That's why bullying is so devastating. That's why, when you're bullied in middle school, it gets registered in the brain the same way as child abuse when you're little. It's really a key thing for us to feel that we belong. This need for belonging is so primal, so profound, that we will do nearly anything to achieve it. It's at the root of our gang problems. It sits at the root of domestic violence. There's so many places where we go to find belonging, even if it's not good for us, even if it devastates us, because that human need for belonging is so profound. We go to great lengths to numb it when we can't get it, when we don't feel like we belong, when we feel lonely. And, by the way, we feel lonely. We are wildly disconnected. We own more pets and more stuffed animals per capita than any other industrialized nation. More of us are on medications for anxiety and depression than any other industrialized nation. And we go to great lengths to numb the pain of disconnection, which we do through drugs or food or physical pleasures or gambling or electronics, potentially, alcohol, work, etc. And so if you want to look at the root of the opioid crisis, look at the root of people not feeling like they are connected and loved. So without belonging, we're lost and more vulnerable. We're more vulnerable to be in relationships that aren't good for us. We're more likely to be hurt and harmed by others and by ourselves. We're more likely to cause harm to ourselves, but also to be in situations where, despite all good evidence to the contrary, we begin to be harmed and will not leave because that need is so profound. It is at the root of all of the social ills we are chasing, right? So if you want to solve the achievement gap, underemployment, incarceration, if you want to solve teen pregnancy, suicide, the opioid epidemic, alcoholism, what do you want to solve? Because this is where it sits. It's at the root-based cause of all the kinds of things we see symptoms of later in life. And so getting to this becomes incredibly important. Maybe you know this, maybe you don't. Maybe you had Psych 101. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think it's pretty colloquial. But what he says is that when your physiological needs are met and you're safe and secure, then you can do all the stuff we all want to do, right? Have hope and have imagination and creativity and innovation and connections with people. That's all the good stuff at the top of the triangle we want to do. Meaning and purpose in our work and our life. But if you're not physiologically safe, and you're not safe psychologically, you can't do the rest. And so we all think of safety as physical safety. But safety is also psychological and emotional. And when you are not tethered to other humans, when you don't know for sure someone has your back, especially when you're young, but that follows you throughout your lifetime, because I see you sitting here, I know you people are grown, but I also know a lot of you are various ages inside. The times in which you were harmed or hurt. And when you come into conflict as adults, you show up as the 6-year-old who was told that they were not important or stupid or whatever happened. Those parts of us live on. And so this idea is we have to have psychological safety in order to access all the great stuff up there, all the relational connection, the intimacy, the meaning, the purpose, and the hope. And we, humans, get psychological safety through our connections, unwavering, nurturing, secure connections to others. And trauma disrupts our capacity to connect. Trauma disrupts our capacity to connect, to trust, and to belong. And when you can't connect, when you can't trust with other human beings, you can't form lasting relationships. You can't have healthy partnerships. You suffer in your parenting. You start to work, but as soon as somebody pisses you off, you're out of there, right? You can't tolerate the ambiguity and the ups and downs and the this and that's of relationships. So when they don't go perfectly well, you can't persist. So this is the worst news of the day around trauma, is that it disrupts humans' capacities to connect with each other and trust each other, which is fundamental to our political process, to civilized society, to good parenting, to loving relationships. Trusting other humans is essential for us to get along well together, and trauma disrupts this. We need these connections because those connections build resilience and protection. I mean, terrible news here. Bad things are going to happen to you, all of you. And great news, awesome, wonderful, outrageously fantastic things are going to happen to all of you. And it is your connections with other people that will help you tolerate that will help you go from the lows of the bad things to get to surviving to the highs of the good things. And so trusting that ambiguity of it'll get better, I've got you until it does, we can do this together, it'll be all right. That is the piece that we need in connection. And this is why you see people on the news with the hurricanes and the tornadoes and the wildfires, and they're not talking about, things like they've got everything they've ever owned in small pieces or rubble behind them. Everything they've ever worked for, every heirloom, everything they've ever purchased in their life is gone. And they're not saying things like, God, can't believe I lost that couch. Do you know how long I looked for a couch to match those drapes? And now it's gone. No, they're hugging on each other and they're saying, it'll be okay because we have each other. As long as we have each other, we can do anything. I mean, have you watched the news? Families are saying this, neighborhoods are saying this, communities, states are saying this. As a nation, we're trying hard to hug on each other and say it, right? Like, as long as we have each other, we are a people who will be okay. And so this idea of connection becomes incredibly important for our thriving and surviving. Because a normal, healthy brain diminishes its capacity to connect after multiple unresolved losses. So if you have been wronged before, if someone has turned on you, double-crossed you, cheated on you, you know you don't show up in full capacity to be in open relationship with the next person, right? I mean, if you have been, if someone has been unfaithful to you, you turn into like a, purse and wallet going through Facebook password stealing kind of freak. Because your brain is telling you it's not safe here. You don't show up able to be in trusting connection. You show up guarded. And the more times that happens to you, the more guarded you are, the less people can get in, the less you can be in connection, and the less you can be in open relationship to people where you can really trust and benefit from that human relationship. And so it becomes really important for us to guard that, especially for young people, for them to have a secure, nurturing connection, and when not, to heal that pain. Because people do their pain. They don't talk it, they do it. People do their pain, but our primary form of intervention is going to talk about it. But you'll see over and over. And this is why I want you to look at the world through the lens of pain-based behavior, right? When you see things that are not trusting, loving, kind connections, it is a pain-based behavior. It is an announcement of something gone awry. It is a past pain being triggered. Those are pain-based behaviors because our normal way of connecting to each other is in loving kindness. That's how we're built. We're built to connect. So when we're not doing that, something went awry, right? And they're trying to express some level of unsafety or pain through their behavior. Remember that when you go back home and you start parenting. What is it saying? What are they saying to me? So many of the behaviors we see in the news, in the newspaper, in our workplaces are normal, natural responses to what happened to them. It's exactly how you would respond if it happened to you. But the key is remembering something happened to them. And so what's that and how are they showing up? So it's not looking at it and labeling, oh, this person's disrespectful or manipulative or defiant. And I know that's hard to do some of the time, right? To look at people's behavior that's just ugly and say like, ugh, like I want to get ugly back. But instead I have to remember that's an expression of pain. It is rarely a willful expression. It's almost always a survival technique, right? Just trying to survive. And so how does trauma show up? In trauma responses. And you know it's there when you have a very small stimulus and a very big response. Small stimulus, big response. And this means that it's tied to a past pain, right? It's tied to something that happened, and whatever's happening in this moment is reminding me of a time where I did not feel safe, where I did not feel like I belonged, where I couldn't trust others to meet my needs, where I wasn't lovable, and you're presenting me with something right now that's reminding me of that time, and I'm showing up with that pain, which is often a much younger version of the person you're talking to, which is why when you say they were acting like a child, yes, they were. A wounded, hurting, disconnected, unlovable child. And so thinking about trauma, I want to say, like, this is not them, this is us, right? So raise your hand, not really. If you grew up in the most perfect of families, everything was beautiful and lovely all of the time, right? The person who answered yes to that once was one of the scariest people I've ever met, right? Because we're raised by humans. I mean, for goodness sake, I teach trauma-informed parenting. I know all of this stuff. I've had more therapy than you guys can even count on fingers and toes, right? And I still yell at my kids. I'm sure they're still going to need therapy later. It's the way it goes. We're human. We're fallible. We do our best. We try. We show up. And our own fears get in the way. Our own past hurts get in the way. And so we're not talking about like some people over there. It's the human experience. And as it turns out, this experience as a human experience has been validated in the research. So what is trauma? It's something that happens to you that makes you feel like you might die or be killed. It's an imprint in your brain that says, my survival's at risk. And it turns out for young that comes around connection, lovability, and safety, and consistency of caregiver. But for all of us, it's things that make you feel like you're at risk of dying or being killed. It can happen before you are born. It can be in vitro. It can happen, I mean, the babies who were born in 9/11 came with heightened levels of cortisol. Like they were born knowing there's a war out here, you better be ready, which is the stress hormone, right? It can be pre-verbal, so it could have happened to you before you even have any memories or words to add to it. It can happen to you for things that you know and things that you don't know. Things you remember, things you don't remember, and it can happen intergenerationally. They are finding that trauma passes forward 7 generations, which is ancient wisdom. It takes 7 generations to heal a wound. That's native, to heal a wound. That's native wisdom, right? And so we often carry the anger, the shame, the pain of our ancestors, especially your parents. And there's a whole lot to be said on that if you are really, furiously rageful and you don't know why. If you have a great life, but you get mad really fast and easy and you can't seem to understand it or control it. Or if you're anxious all the time and you don't know why. Looking at this kind of historical or intergenerational trauma is a great place to start. And entire communities have been traumatized, and that gets passed forward. So there was a study actually done in San Diego in the mid-1990s called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. It was the largest study of its kind done by the Center for Disease Control. There were 17,000 college-educated white folks from the suburbs with great health insurance. Highly representative sample. But you might imagine a privileged sample, a fairly privileged sample. So we wouldn't expect too much to show up there, right? College-educated white folks from the suburbs with good health insurance. So they studied 17,000. They wanted to know, on a question of 10 childhood traumas, how many did people have? How many did they have and how many people experienced adverse childhood experiences? And another way we say that is ACEs or childhood trauma. And it turned out that 2/3 of the population of the highly privileged sample had at least one childhood trauma. 87% had 2 or more. And it's only 10. It's a very simple, refined list. It doesn't include a lot of things. It's abuse, neglect, conflict in the home, right? So, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. This has been repeated over and over and over and over and validated many, many times around the country. And as the number of ACEs increase, so does virtually every health impact you can imagine. Your chances of smoking, of heart disease, lung disease, liver disease, diabetes, obesity, cancer, early pregnancy, early initiation of sex, STDs, multiple sexual partners, domestic violence, you name it. It predicts nearly every one of our health challenges, which makes childhood trauma our greatest public health crisis, right? And so as you see these, it's predictive in groups, not as individuals. But you get a score of 0 to 10 of what is your trauma level. And what we know is that in aggregate, as it goes up, we find significantly increased risk for these things. And what they found was that there's historical trauma that impacts all of us and intergenerational. Then there's the things that happen to us. So the things that come to us, gifted to us by our ancestors. And then the things that we experience in our own lifetime. What happens is when you have these early experiences, it changes the way you think, you feel, and the way you believe, right? And when that changes, when what you think and feel changes, it changes your behavior. And your behavior becomes more likely to be risky in these other areas, which leads to increased social challenges, disability, and health challenges, and up to 20 years early death. And what they have found is that we have these adaptations that help us to survive along the way in our behaviors when we know what this is and when we can address this. And so I'm going to show you the ACEs scale right now. And so if you don't want to know what your score is, 0 to 10, don't look. I'm not going to read them out loud, but I'll give you a minute. You're going to count on your fingers. Nobody's going to ask you what it is. Count in your head, and you'll know what your score is, okay? This is online, and you can have this entire presentation if you want it. Okay? So these are the first 3. The next 3. If you say yes, you add 1 point. And the last 4. And so those are scores of 0 to 10. Turns out that 2/3, over 67% of US adults can answer yes to at least one of these, and that was in the mid-90s, and each generation they've tested since, that number and percent is going up. So if you feel like we are more traumatized, you are right. And if these 2 have trauma and have these 3 babies who have 3 babies, this is an exponential growth curve. And so what do? Number 1, ACEs are not individually predictive. They're predictive in groups. So it doesn't say if you have this, this will happen to you. It says this is what the likelihood is in group. Number 2, if you have 4 or more ACEs, it means on average significantly greater concern. And finally, if you have 4 or more, you may want to do some trauma healing or get some additional supports yourself. You can do this through lots of different areas. I'm happy to connect with people, but there are lots of trauma therapies out there, and the number 1 I'm going to recommend is EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and that can be done by regular therapists covered by regular insurance, and Department of Defense uses it, and it'll change your life. It delinks the memory from the emotional experience. It doesn't help you forget it. You just don't feel like killing anybody when you remember it. And so what we know is that when we're experiencing these ACEs, right, and the point of showing it to you is so that you understand they're kind of regular things. And a lot of people have been through it. It's not extraordinary stuff all of the time. That this is kind of experiences that probably have happened to you or somebody you know, right? And that it puts us at greater risk. And the way our bodies and brains keep us safe is they flood us with these chemicals that say, oh my gosh, my life is at risk, right? I either need to fight this lion, run like heck from this lion, or hold as still as I can behind the tree so the lion doesn't see me. And that shows up as combative adults, right? That shows up as people who quit and leave and can't tolerate or stick it out. And that shows up in the freezing with disassociation or people who are physically there, but emotionally and mentally they are gone, right? That's how that shows up. And so trauma is contagious. It's contagious in our DNA. It's contagious in our behaviors with each other. If you lived with somebody who's depressed, you know it's depressing. If you live with someone with anxiety, you know it makes you anxious. And so in many, many studies, in many ways, which is a whole nother day, this shows up in terms of how we impact people around us. And so what can we do to respond if this is showing up for you? The goal of everything we do with people, with humans, but especially those who have had trauma, the goal of everything we do is to help them feel safe and connected. And I only say connected so you remember it's psychologically safe, not just physically. It's really just safe. And when people feel safe, they can think. They can have things like empathy, right? Compassion, joy, humor, hope, love. None of that comes without safety. And so if you see people acting in other ways, you've got to first come back to what's at threat for them? How do I help them feel safe? How do I help them feel safe? Because if you're seeing behaviors like that are aggressive or confrontive, it's because the person's brain is telling them their life is at risk. And it may not make sense to you, but it's what the message that they're getting is. And so you have to remember it's not about you. I keep threatening to get this temporary tattoos for people to wear on their foreheads, on the foreheads of the kids we serve, so that all the parents and teachers and social workers can see, like, it's not about you. But remembering in people you work with, like, it's not about you. And so your most effective response is to maintain your own regulation, right? So if you don't follow that response, if you can remain calm, that's your most effective response. And to think about this, if I could leave you with one thing, it's when you come to these situations to begin asking the question, what happened to you? Not what's wrong with you, right? So not what's wrong with you, instead what happened to you, and how do I adjust once I know what happened to you? So if what happened to you is something happened to make you feel unsafe, how do I help you feel safe? If you're acting like that because you have a fear of being set out from your tribe, because, I don't know, do you watch the Animal Planet? You know what happens when the lion gets sent off from the tribe, right? The music comes on like dun, dun, dun. It's not good. And the camera kind of pans away. Like the one who gets kicked out is not going to make it. And that's what our human brains are doing. Like, we need to be here for safety and protection. And when we get sent out to the field, it's like the music comes on in our head. Dun, dun, dun. Not so good. And so what do we do to help people feel connected, and how do we adjust there? Some of the interventions that help to regulate, help to heal. And so we are finding just great relief in some of these places. Emdr, I told you about. Yoga. I mean, regular YMCA yoga, not trauma-informed yoga, has twice the outcomes of medication and therapy for depression and anxiety. Come on. Like, this is stuff we can all do, right? Gratitude practices, having a picture of people who you love next to your bed and writing down 3 things for which you're grateful before you get up, took half of the Mayo Clinic docs off of depression and anxiety medication. Mindfulness, meditation, spending time in nature, which regulates us. Playing, music, singing, or dancing, you have to be regulated. We couldn't all sing the national anthem if you weren't regulated. you'd be like this, right? So we have to come together in those things. So anything that brings us together that way. Art, neurofeedback, physical activity, and sports, especially team sports, the back and forth, right? That call and response, that you throw the ball, I throw the ball. We have to regulate to do that. Martial arts, another great way. So how does trauma show up in change efforts, right? When we're leading change, this triggers people. Because if I don't feel safe and you start moving stuff around or changing the rules, it triggers my past time where I didn't know what was going to come next and I feel unsafe. And so you see people act all kinds of crazy around change, don't you? When you start to move or change things, people respond in unexpected ways. So that instability can trigger past traumas. And the signs of that, what you're looking for is there a decrease in trust or communication, laughter, joy, in their flexibility, their ability to kind of be engaged? That's a sign that you're triggering past traumas, right? If you see increases in gossip or fear responses, pushback and dysregulation, if people are melting down or not showing up or being disengaged, those are signs that you have triggered something and need to slow it down and go back to safety and connection around your change effort. So if you're seeing a lot of that in your work, that's what's going on. I love this book. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Heifetz and Linsky, but Leadership on the Line gives some really great recommendations for people trying to do disruptive innovation. And what they do is caution about the pace of change, outpacing people's capacity, the human capacity to manage change. And so as you look at that, considering how long have people been going through change, how much change has happened, and what's it triggering for them, is a good read. And so ways that you can create safety in a change process when you're considering a universal precaution around trauma is that we humans need predictability. We need role clarity. We need to know that we're valued and affirmed. We need to know that we're included and empowered, that there's some transparency about what's going on, that we can not have to worry about what's happening behind closed doors, that the leaders are vulnerable in saying when they don't know or what they do know, and that you over-communicate in times of change. This creates safety. So if you're trying to go back to safe and connected, this creates safety. That's how you get there. And I mean, just think about it in your own individual personal relationships, right? When people are transparent with you, when they say they don't know, when they communicate with you, when they do things to build trust, you know, you can relax. And so when you're going through change, thinking about that. What to expect? This diagram was something my late mentor shared with me quite a bit, but he talked about when you're scaling down the old way and you're scaling up the new way, you're basically taking the old way and doing less of it. At the same time, you're taking the new way and doing more of it. And right in the middle, people begin to get really scared because they don't know, do the old rules apply or the new rules apply? And so it gets really scary, especially when you don't have a strong sense of tethering and connection. So this is what's happening in our country right now. We're in the middle of a massive shift in our doing and thinking. And you see people going back to the old way. I just was hearing something on NPR, like the medieval times are getting really popular again. People are dressing like it, reading it, doing more plays. Like people want to go back, like just hang on to when things were clear and strong. And we won't get into that. And then there are, you know, the new way is coming and it's inevitable. Like you can't stop babies from being born, turns out, right? And so there's all kinds of things shifting in our society and in our economy and in our human connections to one another. And in the middle, right in the middle, is the time when it gets the most scary. Because I don't know, I'm hoping we go back to the old way where I was comfortable, but oh shoot, the new way keeps coming. And I don't know which one is gonna win out. And so people get scared and they act out. And we're seeing a lot of that. I feel scared behavior, right? And what he talked about was, as you're circling in a new way of work, while you're circling out the old way of doing it, those two will clash at those points, at the dots. And the more clashes you have, and the bigger the clashes, the greater the indication that you're about to do something very transformational and lasting. He would say you've hit the underbelly of the beast, the more battles ensue, right? So when this happens, you know that you're hitting transformational change. But change makers, when this happens, or other people, would want to quit then. Like, it's getting too scary, and there's too many fights about it. Maybe we should just go back to the old way. Or it's too hard. It's too, makes me feel unsafe. We should just go back to the old way. But the bigger the battles get, the scarier it gets, the more we need to lean in and persist through that, because the closer we are to the other side of real change. And that is the difference between regular people and people like you, is that we know to lean in these times. And so the US entrepreneurship rate has been declining for decades, right? And when you don't feel safe, which is rooted in trauma, you can't dream, connect, and innovate, right? You have to have that base safety in order to do those higher order things. And so it's incumbent upon us to help create safety so we can create change, because people won't come with us if they don't feel safe. And so this is the promise, right? The promise of social enterprise is that folks like you are willing to take the risks to create the change that must happen, that you are the change makers who understand the need to persist through hard things. You are the ones who have figured out how to build your networks of support, look around, so that you can persist through things that are hard, things that are scary, things that are unknown, and to get through to the other side of change, to persist. And the caution that I'll leave you with at the end of this is to say that this idea of safety and connection is important not only for all of us and for you as well, but it's super important for you all to nurture it. Because if you are leading movements and change, if you are creating enterprise that helps to do good in the world, you have to be able to have the safety and support necessary to persevere through these kinds of things. And in order to do that, you've got to have your own connections, and you've got to have your own sense of resilience and well-being. So when people ask me, how do we create organizational well-being? I say, take a strong look at your leader and start there, right? Your leader has to have that, because it's contagious. Well-being is contagious to 3 degrees of separation, just like trauma is. We have mirror neurons. We're impacting each other all the time. Like, I can come hug up on you and make you so nervous. I could raise your heart rate. I could raise your pulse. And those are automatic, but I can move them, right? And so we just have this deep and intense unknown connections to one another. So it becomes really important as leaders to stay connected in that kind of a way. So the reason why this says what it says is that, I'll take my slide back, David, is that a few years ago, I was doing this big change work, and I had kind of had it. I was kind of done. And I was exhausted and felt like, everybody was fighting me every part of the way. And my husband kind of squared me up, and he said, listen to me, Amelia. You were born to do this work. You were born to do this. Why would you let them have that part of you? And I thought, God dang it, like, that's right. So I backed myself up from the edge, and I remembered the most critical threat to whatever change I want to make is my own stability, my own sustainability, right? So I've got to take care of me in order to make this happen. If I don't feel safe, if I don't feel connected, if I don't feel regulated, I'm not going to be able to lead people through the other side of this. I'm not going to be able to persist through the ambiguity of this. And so I did a bunch of things to walk myself back from that edge, right? I did Emdr. I started doing acupuncture. I started getting regular massage. I started doing other things to take care of myself. And what I really want to leave you with today is that we need you, not that, this. We need you to be okay. We need you to make sure that you're safe and you're connected, that you're regulated, that you have networks of support. Because whatever it is that you need to continue to sustain and persist is going to be incredibly important for the rest of us. If we're dealing with a society that somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of people have experienced early childhood trauma, we need a bunch of helpers, folks. And even if you're one of those people who added up your ACEs, you're still the helpers, right? And so just as a closing remark to say to you, remember to take care of you. Remember to think about your own safety. Remember to think about your own connections, your own belonging, your own need for rest and love and deep and fulfilling relationships, because it is what will fuel you to do the amazing things that you're doing to help all of us to create a bigger collective impact. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Can Can I take a couple of questions? Or you need, okay. Sorry. Maybe? Anybody have any questions? Comments? Yeah.
Thinking about the Philadelphia ACEs, I think that childhood attachment is super important.
Yep.
But for those people not in the field, the Philadelphia ACEs ask questions related to systemic and structural oppression.
Yes.
Racial violence, community level violence. And I think it's important that if we decontext.
Yeah, for sure. So as I said, this is a really limited listing, right? It doesn't include things that also make you feel like you might be at risk of dying or being killed, which come in the form of, it doesn't say things like, did you grow up where there was gun violence? Did you feel like in your childhood experience of education that you were, discredited, that you had oppression in your learning and how people viewed your learning capacities? There's a whole bunch of things that are community-based, that are systemic, that deal with racism. And for another good kind of reference on this, I think Brene Brown, frankly, has done a phenomenal job on talking about racism as collective trauma recently. But it is a short list. It's the one they studied with CDC, and Philadelphia did repeat this with a significant addition of other kinds of structural and community experiences. And so when you add those in, what I would say is, when you add that in, we go from what, 2/3 to 95% maybe? Nobody knows. We haven't added all those pieces together. But what it means is that this is a uniform and universal experience that is exacerbated when you come from a community that has experienced significant structural racism, significant oppression, that is yet an additional layer on top of all these kinds of other pieces that happen. And so I do a lot of work in historical and intergenerational trauma, which talks about that, because it's not just what you experienced in your present day. It's what your community experienced, it's what your family experienced, it's what your historical generations experienced 7 generations back. So the idea of collective trauma is also impacting where we're at today. And I think the important thing to say about that is the idea that it's not, this isn't a willful, this isn't conscious, this isn't something that I can do, but that there are experiences in our lives, particularly in the area of oppression and structural racism, that are going to add trauma on top of trauma because of the situation, not because of one person's experience or choices, which I think is a really important thing to say too. Thank you for bringing that up. I think that takes us to time. I'll hang out for a short bit. Is there a break after this, after a few more minutes? And then I'm going to try to get myself to LAX. So thanks very much.